get carried off. Yeah.
You heard the bell. He's got to learn.
That's it.
Hear the bell.
All right. So, good morning, everybody. So, we continue on now with our study of the patriarchs. And have you ever found a 20 between the cushions of the couch? You know that feeling? Yeah, it's a really good feeling. So, guess what I just figured out? We have one extra week because I had scheduled to be finishing the patriarch study today, and then thinking that May 31st was going to be Memorial Day weekend. Well, it's not. This is Memorial Day weekend. So we actually don't need to finish today. We actually can spread out just a little bit. We'll do today and we'll finish next week. Then we have the picnic for the confirmation. And then we'll decorate cookies for the end of school year. So it actually lies really nicely that we can back up a little bit because we had to really, really blitz chapter 31, as in I said maybe a sentence and a half about it. And that sentence and a half might not have been very coherent. So what I want to do is back up a little bit, but let's also get ourselves caught up. So we've been studying all of the patriarchs. So who was the first patriarch that we studied? Abraham, right? And God gave to Abraham at first a great promise. What was the promise? Do you remember any of the elements of the promise? Yep, he would become father of a great nation. Yep. What else? Great nation. His name would be great. So both like great in terms of size, great in terms of renown or reputation. So great name, great nation. Promised him the land, actually to his offspring, not to him. And then lastly, what's that? Oh, well, we got the great nation, yeah. And yeah, descendant, and later it came back to numbering like the stars in the heavens or like the sand on the seashore or the dust of the earth. So obviously some pretty big numbers there. And then lastly was that God would bless those who blessed him and curse those who cursed him, right? So that through him would be the availability of a blessing to everybody. All right, so we saw all of Abraham's life. We saw his patience, 25 years until the son of the promise was born. In the meantime, they tried to solve that problem themselves through Ishmael. It was not the solution. Then finally, at 100 years old, he finally had Isaac. The next thing we see about Isaac is when God had commanded Abraham to do what? To sacrifice him. Yeah, so then we saw that whole incredible story of Abraham trusting that even if he had to put him to death, that God would be able to bring him back from the dead, is what we're told when it's explained for us in the New Testament. But we see Isaac very much in a Christ-like role in that sense. But God instead at the last minute provided the ram. And then we saw very few events from Isaac's life where he's actually the main character. We saw Abraham sending his servant so that the servant would get for Isaac a wife from his own people. So all the way back over in Haran is where he had gone. So he had found a wife for Isaac, which was Rebekah. And then really we skip right away to the kiddos being born. So who were the twins? Jacob and Esau, right? And Esau was born first, and then Jacob came out holding on to his heel, which was a wonderful visual reminder or teach because they named him Jacob, which literally means one who grasps the heel. But what does that euphemism mean in Hebrew idiom? A troublemaker, a deceiver, yep, a trickster. And so that's Jacob's name. Does he live up to the name?
Yes.
He does. First thing's actually not a trick. First thing, he just makes some food for his brother who says, I'm so hungry, I'm going to die anyway. So sure, you can have my birthright. That'd be fine because it's no use to me if I'm dead. Sounds like he was a little bit dramatic about his appetite, but hey. And so Jacob essentially purchased Esau's birthright with the stew. And then we had the issue where his mother, Rebekah, helped to plot against Esau to steal his blessing. So you remember Jacob put on the skins. He pretended that he was Esau. He directly lied to his father. He actually invoked God's name to lie to his father when he said, how did you find the game so quickly? And he said, well, the Lord your God, he enabled me to do so. So we were breaking a lot of commandments in that story. And then he had to flee because how did Esau feel about what had happened?
Betrayed.
Absolutely, felt betrayed. And did he feel just a little bit bad? He felt a lot, right? Yeah, and he came back to it over and he was weeping and did you spare no blessing for me, my father, and all this sort of thing. So Jacob has to head out of town with nothing but the clothes on his back, 2 hops and a skip in front of his brother trying to kill him. God shows up to him in a dream, renews, says you are the one through whom, and actually went through pretty much point by point all the things that he had given first to Abraham, then to Isaac. So now Jacob is fleeing. Jacob ended up in Haran, in the household of his uncle Laban. And then what happened?
7 years went by.
7 years went by, but they went by like the blink of an eye, right? That's actually what it says. Because he was so in love. He had seen Rachel. What happened miraculously when he first saw Rachel? Remember? Yeah, there was a stone that they had to get all the flocks together that covered the well. And they couldn't move the stone until all the flocks and shepherds had gathered. Then they would move the stone and water the animals. And Jacob takes one look at Rachel, and he moves it himself. So that's what attraction can do for you. And then his uncle Laban says, "Well, what? You shouldn't have to work for me for free. So what? Name your price." He says, "Well, I'd kind of like to marry your daughter Rachel. So how about I work for you 7 years, and then I can marry Rachel?" So he worked for him 7 years. There's a beautiful verse where it says those 7 years seemed to him like a day. So great was his love for Rachel. And at the end of 7 years, they get married and live happily ever after, right? No, at the end of 7 years, it's the end of the wedding reception. They've probably had some beverages. It's late at night. And
Lighting's not good.
yeah, the lighting is probably not good enough. There may have been a veil involved because when Jacob wakes up the morning after his wedding night, who's laying next to him?
Rachel's sister.
Rachel's sister Leah. Yes. So Laban has sort of put one over on him, and he says, "What's up with this?" That's my translation. And Laban says, "Well, it's not our tradition to marry the younger daughter before the older daughter is married. So I thought you'd be cool with me giving you Leah instead. But it's no biggie. If you work for me another 7 years, I'll give you Rachel as well, and you can have her after just a week, and then just you need to stay and work." And so that's what happened. And so now he's married to both Rachel and Leah. So he's married to two sisters, which is not something the Bible recommends. So he works faithfully for Laban for a while. And then Laban realizes that God is blessing him and that Jacob's flocks are increasing to the point that they're larger than Laban's. And he's afraid. Laban is afraid that Jacob is going to leave. So that's actually where we're going to pick up because we had to skip over a bunch here. And so we can go back since I've got a little bit of extra time since I found the extra $20 in the cushion of the couch. So we're going to go to chapter 31. And like we've been doing, I'm going to read some big old chunks and then we'll talk about like what's the significance of what's going on. I think there are some extra Bibles around. If anybody's not within, does anybody need a Bible but isn't within reach of one? Because I see a few sitting on tables that might not be needed. Anybody need one? Okay. Excellent. If you're watching online, this is the ESV that we're reading. I'm on page 25 if you've got the burgundy one. If you have the black covered one, it's probably like 23 or something like that. Here we go. Now Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, "Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has gained all this wealth." And Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favor as before. Then the Lord said to Jacob, now notice this is an instruction from God, and it's all caps Lord, so we got the name Yahweh showing up there. So Yahweh says to Jacob, "Return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you." Which is just a really nice echo because we're in the same place where God first called Abraham. Although when he first called him, he said, "Go to a land that I'm going to show you." Abraham didn't even know where he was going, but now we know where we're going. It's a land that's been promised. And so it's just kind of a nice little echo there. "Return to the land of your fathers, to your kindred, I will be with you." So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah into the field where his flock was. By the way, at this point, does he just have the two wives? No, he's doubled, sort of. Because yeah, exactly. Remember we had, you could call it an arms race, but it wasn't arms. Because they were trying to have kids. And so when Rachel couldn't have any children and Leah already had a bunch, then Rachel gave her servant to Jacob to try to have children for her. And he went along with it and she had some kids. And then Leah's like, "Hey, guess what? I have a servant too." And she gives the servant to Jacob to sleep with and to have some kids, which is exactly what he does. And then finally Rachel has a child, and the child is named Joseph. He's gonna take up most of the rest of Genesis, but we're not going to continue on into that. Also mentions that she's going to have Benjamin, but that happens a little later in the Joseph story. It's sort of previewing. So ended up, anybody remember how many boys does Jacob have through the 4 different women? 12. Kind of important because those are going to become the 12 tribes of Israel. We're going to see next week probably. Jacob's name is about to change too. All right, so he sent to Rachel and Leah into the field where the flock was, and he said to them, "I see that your father does not regard me with favor as he did before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I've served your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times, not to mention the whole bride swap thing. But God did not permit him to harm me. If he said, the spotted shall be your wages, then all the flock bore spotted. And if he said, the striped shall be your wages, then all the flock bore striped. Thus God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. In the breeding season of the flock, I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream that the goats that mated with the flock were striped, spotted, and mottled. Now this is really important. Keep in mind here. The angel of the Lord said to me in the dream, Jacob, and I said, behold me, here I am. This is what we've seen. This is the right response. We saw it all the way back with Abraham. He said, here I am. And he said, lift up your eyes and see. All the goats that mate with the flock are striped, spotted, and mottled, for I've seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Remember, that was the dream he had while he was fleeing from Esau when he owned nothing. Now he's become quite a wealthy man. Now arise, go out from this land, return to the land of your kindred. So he's reporting all of this to his two wives. Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, is there any portion or inheritance left to us in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us, and he has indeed devoured our money. All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do. So they're in agreement. It's time to head out, and our father certainly has not earned our loyalty, and so let's go. So Jacob arose and set his sons and his wives on camels. He drove away all his livestock, all his property that he had gained, the livestock in his possession that he had acquired in Padan Aram, that's the land that he's in, to go to the land of Canaan to his father Isaac. Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household gods. And Jacob tricked, and you can see that the translation note can also be stole the heart of. That's one of the idioms that's used for tricking. So Jacob tricked Laban the Aramean by not telling him that he intended to flee. He fled with all that he had and arose and crossed the Euphrates and set his face toward the hill country of Gilead. So this is back to the map. This is where Abraham was when he was called, and then he followed along, which is the path. Remember, Egypt and Babylon are the two major civilizations at the time. This is all desert here, so this is the road. So now this is Padan Aram up here. So now he's setting out again. This is the Tigris or the Euphrates River, excuse me, right here. So he crosses it and he's headed down to what's going to be called Gilead. One of the things that's fascinating in the Old Testament is the way they use place names even before those places have been named. It shows just incredibly detailed geographic knowledge on the part of the ones who were recording. And as we've already seen a couple of times with the patriarchs, it'll say, you know, they went to like Bethel, which formerly was called Luz. I mean, this is all just the detail that if you were making up a story, you would have a very difficult time doing that. But if you're telling a truthful story, that's the sort of thing you would do, is say, well, the name was changed and it used to be called that. You start to use place names even if they hadn't been named yet, that sort of thing. So, all right, so they're setting out with everything that they've got. Waited till Laban was away, and now we're out. So when it was told to Laban on the third day that Jacob had fled, he took his kinsman, this is Laban now, took his kinsman with him, pursued him for 7 days, and followed close after him into the hill country of Gilead. But God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream by night, and said to him, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. It's not going to quite follow that. I don't think this means like have no dialogue with him whatsoever, but I think this is meaning don't bless him and don't curse him. Stay entirely neutral here in how you approach this. And this is probably a good thing that God's warning Laban in this way. Oh, by the way, I kind of skipped over. What did Rachel take?
A god.
Yeah, her father's household gods. What does that mean? Anybody know? So each household would have had little idols that they would have prayed to. Notice that Jacob said, the God of my father has prospered me when talking to his wives, not the God of our fathers. So this would seem to be evidence that they, like many in the ancient Near East, had gods, and they would have little, statues, little idols of those gods. They often would be the most valuable thing you'd own. They'd be, gold or precious stones or whatever. Well, Rachel, feeling a little put upon by the whole scenario, she decides, you know what, I'm taking these. Now, a couple of problems with that right away. What are those problems? Danielle?
You shouldn't have had them in the first place.
Yeah, these are gods, right? So we are to have no other gods. Now, again, we still haven't got the 10 Commandments yet, but it's clear which God is guiding and which God is providing, and it ain't them. So there's an idolatry problem here, and of course, what's the other obvious problem? Theft, yeah, kind of a thing too. So we see Rachel, who is going to be extremely faithful in many other ways, joining the list of these being recorded for us, both husbands and wives, not always behaving the way we would like our children or would teach them to do. And so we see the humanity very clearly on display, and that's going to continue here. Verse 25. Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country. Laban with his kinsmen pitched tents in the hill country of Gilead. So they've actually made it quite a ways. And remember, it took 7 days for Laban even to catch up with them. He'd been off shearing his herd. So Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done, that you've tricked me and driven away my daughters like captives of the sword? Why did you flee secretly and trick me and did not tell me, so that I might have sent you away with mirth and songs, with tambourine and lyre?" Yeah, there's a lyre involved, but it's not spelled that way. This reminds me, by the way, very much, remember King Herod when he wants to find where's Jesus so that I can go and worship him? That's not why he wanted to find Jesus. So Laban here said, "Oh, I would have given you just a wonderful hero's farewell if I'd known." And why did you not permit me to kiss my sons and my daughters farewell? Now you've done foolishly. It's in my power to do you harm, but the God of your father, so notice again the way that this is being referred to. And by the way, his father is Isaac, and Isaac's father is Jacob. So there's patriarchal, the God of the promise. There's definitely a lot of overtones for that. Oh, I took my hand away, so I lost my spot. Oh, here we go. The God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, "Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. Now you've gone away because you longed greatly for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods?" Jacob answered and said to Laban, "Because I was afraid, for I thought that you would take your daughters from me by force." That's why he left in the middle of the night. He doesn't know anything about the gods being stolen. So he says, "Anyone with whom you find your gods shall not live. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what I have that's yours and take it." Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So he's being very bold here. He probably thinks this is some other trick. And he's insisting, "I did not take anything except the striped and spotted lambs that you told me would belong to me," which was chapter 30. And then remember, when Laban said, "You can have all the striped and spotted ones," then he took all the striped and spotted ones and put them somewhere else. In the theory that all that Jacob would have would be just the plain ones, and he wouldn't get to keep any. So Jacob probably smells a rat yet again. And so he says, "Listen, you put to death anybody who has your gods, because I did not take your gods." Oh. Okay, then Jacob became angry. He berated Laban. Jacob said to Laban, "What's my offense? What's my sin that you've hotly pursued me? For you felt through all my goods. What have you found of all your household gods? Set it here before my kinsmen and your kinsmen, that they may decide between us two. These 20 years I've been with you." So the 14 that he had to work for the two of them, plus the 6 in addition. "Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried. I've not eaten the rams of your flock." Oh, I skipped a section. Sorry. I skipped a very important paragraph. Forget that. Yeah, back up to 33. "So Laban went into Jacob's tent, because he said, if anybody find them, put them to death, right? And we know who has them. Rachel has them. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and into Leah's tent and into the tent of the 2 female servants." By the way, notice the way that it lists this. Jacob's tent, Leah's tent, and the 2 female servants. So Jacob is clearly sharing the tent with Rachel. The favoritism continues. So now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them in the camel's saddle and sat on them. Laban felt all about the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, "Let not my lord be angry that I cannot rise before you, for the way of women is upon me." That's why she can't stand up, which is why he can't search the saddle that's underneath her, which is where she's hidden the household gods. Yep, exactly. So she's saying, "It's my time of the month, so I can't get up. Sorry, I can't stand up. I'm just going to wait here while you search my whole tent for the gods you claim somebody has stolen," which she's stolen and she's sitting on. And so he searched, but he did not find the household gods. This is one of the few times that we see Rachel acting on her own, and we see apple tree, right? We see this whole pattern. We've seen it throughout. We saw with Isaac and Ishmael the rivalry, and then Ishmael got sent away by Sarah. We've seen it with Rebecca with her 2 kids, Jacob and Esau. Now we're seeing it with Rachel stealing from her own father, but on the other hand, he's the one who sold her through treachery. So lots going on here, a lot of backstabbing. Then it's funny. This is why I realized I missed a bit, because Jacob takes this victory lap. of like, see, proof. Nobody stole anything from you, not knowing that they're right there in the settle. So then he became angry. Now his berating of Laban. What's my offense? What's my sin that you pursued me? You fell through all my goods. What have you found of your household gods? Set it here before my kinsmen and your kinsmen, that they may decide between the two of us. These 20 years I've been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried. I haven't eaten the rams of your flocks. What was torn by wild beasts, I didn't bring it to you. I bore the loss of it myself. From my hand you required it, whether stolen by day or by night. There I was. By day the heat consumed me, the cold by night. My sleep fled from my eyes. That's a fascinating phrase, isn't it? We've all experienced that, haven't we? Sleep fleeing from our eyes. These 20 years I've been in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flock, and you've changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been on my side, fear probably meaning more like honor or faith or respect. Not fearing Isaac, but the same fear, honor, faith, respect that Isaac had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God saw my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked you last night. Then Laban answered and said to Jacob, the daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks are my flocks, all that you see is mine. And he's not actually wrong. In the structure back then, you would have had the household father, the Beit Av, father of the house, and everything belonged to the father of the house. It really didn't matter who'd been caring for it or who had helped it to prosper. And then when the father died, they would go through the birthright inheritance, factored in so heavily with Jacob and Esau already, and split things up correctly. So Jacob is saying, this is all mine, I earned it. Laban's actually got the law on his side in this regard. He's saying, actually, no, this is all mine. This all still belongs to me, to my household, as long as I'm alive. And he says then, but what can I do this day for these my daughters, or for their children whom they have born? Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I. Remember, we saw the covenant between Abraham and God. Now we have to see an example of a covenant between 2 humans. Let it be a witness between you and me. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. Jacob said to his kinsmen, gather stones. They took stones and made a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Laban called it Jagar Sahadutha, which rolls right off the tongue, the heap of witness. But Jacob called it Galid, which also means the heap of witness. One's Aramaic, one's Hebrew. And then Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me today. Therefore he named it Galid and Mizpah. So they got 3 names because it means watch post. That's what Mizpah means. For the Lord, and he said, the Lord watch between you and me when we're out of one another's sight. If you oppress my daughters, or if you take wives besides my daughters and their servants, although no one is with us, see, God is witness between you and me. So this is a way of saying that the role of the household father, which Laban has played very dishonestly at times, but is still his to play. He's saying, I now leave that to God. And this stone is the witness of this arrangement between us. And if you cheat my kids, my daughters, my grandchildren, etc., God's the one who's going to take that up. So, let's see, where did I pause? Which verse? 51. Thank you. Then Laban said to Jacob, I gotta stop talking with my hands. I gotta keep my. Then Laban said to Jacob, see this heap and the pillar which I've set between you and me. This heap is a witness. The pillar is a witness that I will not pass over this heap to you, and you will not pass over this heap and this pillar to me to do harm. We talked about this last week. This is like the kids in the back seat. That's the line. Don't cross that line, right? That's how we're going to get along really well, is by making sure we know where the boundary is and not crossing it. The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. By the way, when Abraham was first called, we talked about the fact that Nahor, his father, already worshipped the real God, the true God. We don't know why. We don't know the backstory on that. But this is the verse where I said, later on we're going to see that the God of Abraham was already the God of Abraham's father as well. We don't know why. So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac, again, by Isaac's faith, in the same faith that Isaac had. And Jacob offered a sacrifice in the hill country and called his kinsmen to eat bread. They ate bread. They spent the night in the hill country. And early in the morning, Laban arose and kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned home. It is adorable. How many of you thought, because this is the last of Jacob and Laban, they're not going to interact anymore scripturally. How many of you thought it would end this well? What we've seen overall has been a mess of all the family relations and everybody grabbing what they can grab and not evidencing trust in God, although fortunately they never actually abandon his promises. And part of why I'm glad to take the time and slow it down is to see the way that God can also reconcile. Has Jacob cheated Laban? He's been pretty sharp in his dealings. Has Laban cheated Jacob?
Yes.
Absolutely, multiple times over. But that this could end with the two of them making a covenant together, blessing one another. Laban gets a chance, though he does not deserve it, to kiss his kids and his grandchildren goodbye and to say, God will watch over you. I just love that we get to slow down enough to say, even in a situation that looks like there is no way this ends well, and especially not with those people playing main roles, God can still do it. He can do it. Yeah, Christy.
Curious because obviously Laban had house gods and that sort of thing, but when he calls Jacob to make this covenant, they turn towards God.
Yep.
So that's just a little surprising. Does he also believe in God and a house gods, or is he going? Is this another sign of like respect and deference to Jacob by going to Jacob's God as opposed to the God that he believes in?
So I think it's probably some of both. She said, like, all right, so when they make this covenant, they make it before God, and Laban himself said, God's the one who's going to watch over these, but he's got these other household gods, these other idols. So what's going on with that? So for someone in that culture, there were different gods for all kinds of different cultures, and we're going to see that throughout the Old Testament. You know, so Moab has Chemosh, and there's Asherah, and there's all these. The Philistines had Baal. They all had, and the idea was if you went to war with another culture, if you won, that proved that your God was more powerful than their God. And if they won, that proved that their God was more powerful than your God. So if you are polytheistic, which is the word for believing in many gods, it's not really that alarming to you to think there might be an additional one that I didn't know about yet. And this actually might be one he did know about, since Nahor, who's the relative, the ancestor of both of them, had been worshiping the true God. It could very well be that Laban was just kind of hedging his bets. This one seems to be powerful sometimes, but what harm could it do to also worship these as well, which also happens frequently. This comes into play in a practical way, even in our modern culture, because if you have a polytheistic religion like Hinduism is, if you're seeking to speak to someone who's Hindu about the faith, the idea that Jesus is God is not going to be a hang-up for them whatsoever, the way that it would be if you're talking with someone who is, say, Jewish or Muslim, where the idea that Jesus is God is going to be the real issue that you need to try to talk about. Well, for a Hindu, that's fine, because they have, depending on the studies you look at, somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 million gods. And so 6 million and one percentage-wise is really not much of a change. So yeah, we can put him on the shelf with the rest of them, which may very well be what Laban was doing, except what I can guarantee is that when God came to Laban, and then Jacob even knows that God has come to Laban, the other ones haven't done that. That's unique to the one true God. The other ones have never actually showed up and given him instruction and then provided and all of that. So we see God distinguishing himself as the one true God, even amongst those who worship other gods. Yep, Sunday school's ending, so have a great week. Yep, no, you're good. Other thoughts here with chapter 31. It's not one that really ever shows up in the lectionary. It's not a lot. This is not in any of the children's Bibles that I've read, but there's a lot here that we can see. Danielle, yeah.
It's neat to see that God can still bless us through the actions of deeply sinful people.
Mm-hmm. That God can still bless us even through the actions of deeply sinful people. That God can write a happy ending, even though a happy ending looks like the absolute least likely outcome. That God can still do that. We don't see, unlike, say, when Abraham was told to sacrifice Isaac, also looked pretty bleak, looked like there's no happy ending here, and then God writes one, and we saw lots and lots of messianic overtones with that, and so forth. Here we just see the fact that God can reconcile people, even people who have wronged one another, even people who have done everything that they could to take advantage of one another, have every reason to dislike one another, and in fact are still in the process of that separation, that division. God can still work reconciliation. It's wonderful to get to see it happen. It doesn't always happen, but God can do it. We get to see it also, like when Paul and Barnabas split in the New Testament over John Mark, but then later, at one of Paul's later letters, he writes, "Please send Mark to me. I find him very valuable." So there's been a reconciliation that's happened at some point, even though it had divided previously. It's wonderful to see. Yeah, Christy.
I find it interesting, though, and I don't know if you find it, but that even if God reconciles them,
Mhm.
separated, essentially. So he brings peace, but he doesn't bring proximity.
Yeah.
Is
That can be very practical. Yeah. So I love it. He does reconcile them, but he reconciles them by setting up a very clear boundary between the two of them, which is supposed to be kept. I don't think reconciliation was possible with Jacob and Laban if they lived in the same zip code. I just don't think there's any way. Eventually, one of them's going to come up with something. They're constantly scheming. And so God, in his wisdom, separates them. Also, Laban's going back to his household, to the land of his ancestors, and Jacob is now going to the land that's been promised to him, which has been called, when God called him, to the land of your father. So it's appropriate that they would separate as well. It's not like some artificial boundary is being set up. It's appropriate that Laban and his possessions stay in Paddan Aram, that Jacob and his possessions go down to Gilead, which evidently is where Abraham is at the time. But he's going to need to look around for him because Abraham still doesn't have a land yet. But we'll get there in just a second. So for Jacob, why did he go to Paddan Aram in the first place? Let's make sure we're clear on this. No, that was why. That's the servant. That's one generation previous. Yep. To escape his brother, right? His brother who is just robbed of everything. And now he has to flee with nothing but the clothes on his back, right? And he flees to his uncle Laban, which is what his mom had said when you go to my brother Laban. Well, we see how that turned out. But now he's coming back. He's super wealthy at this point, you know, in any measure of ancient wealth, he's got it, you know, whether it's the number of the children or the number of the flocks or that sort of thing. But where's he going now? Back where his brother lives. Got a problem. Out of the frying pan, into the fire, right? So if you see, what's the heading for chapter 32? Jacob fears Esau. Yeah, I would think so. So let's go. Chapter 32, verse 1. Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. That's happened a lot of times. I'd love if we'd been like, I should have done like a little hash mark tally, the number of times God just keeps showing up and telling them. Like when we look to the patriarchs, we're not really looking to them for their wisdom, because pretty much every time that they were wise, God had told them exactly what to do. And the wisdom was just doing it. There is wisdom in that, and a wonderful example for us. But so the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." So he called the name of that place Mahanaim, which actually means two camps. The idea we've got like the human camp. I think this is, to me, I read this as an allusion to the spiritual reality. We knew we had a physical camp, but it's also God's camp. I kind of like that. Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. Now Esau is also called Edom, so this is called Edom because it's where he lives. It's another one of those naming convention things that proves the level of knowledge. Instructing them, thus, this was Jacob to his servants, "Thus shall you say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male servants, and female servants. I have sent to tell my lord in order that I might find favor in your sight." So he's sending a little warning. I'm coming. And I got lots of goodies, but I'm coming back. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau. He's coming to meet you, and there are 400 men with him." What are you thinking if you're Jacob at this point? Yeah, trouble. He does not have 400 armed men. He's got flocks and children and wives and servants. So we see Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. Now, by the way, if Esau has 400 men, has he done all right for himself while Jacob was gone? Yeah, even though he didn't get his birthright, even though he didn't get the blessing, he's doing okay because he's a pretty powerful guy at this point. Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. He divided, this is interesting, he divided the people who were with him and the flocks and herds and camels into two camps, thinking if Esau comes to the one camp and attacks it, then the camp that is left will escape. Now, usually military tactics, you never divide your forces. But in this case, since Esau doesn't really know how much Jacob's got, if he splits them into two completely separate groups, then Esau, even if he completely destroys one group, might not even know that there was a second group. So this is a pretty tricky strategy. Alex?
I will say it's interesting in our air tactics. This is a tactic that we would use. We would call it a bracket, and we would you bracket and see which group
Mhm.
the bad guy is leaning on, and the other would make an unobserved entry. I just thought it was interesting. It very much is
It tracks.
Yeah.
Yep. If the enemy doesn't know what you've got,
Yeah.
then splitting can be an excellent tactic. That's very cool. That is still a current tactic as well. Bracketing. Huh?
We call it an exit. And you would say, two, he's leaning on you, exit left.
Okay.
And you would, yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, that's exactly what Jacob is doing here.
Yeah.
So he's splitting them up so that if one gets destroyed, hopefully the other doesn't get destroyed. All right. Then Jacob said, this is wonderful. Jacob turns to prayer. O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, O Lord. So he's saying Elohim, that's God, and Yahweh, which is Lord. So he knows exactly who he's talking to. O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, that I may do you good. I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. Is this correct? Yes, this is correct. He is not worthy of God's faithfulness. Why has God been faithful to him? Because he's the child of the promise. Because God's faithful to his promises, not because he's covered himself with glory with his decision making. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan. He's right by the river, evidently. And now I've become two camps. Please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he may come and attack me, the mothers with the children. But you said, I will surely do you good, and will make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. Remember, that was the vision at Bethel, when Jacob had the dream and God had restored to him this promise. So what he's doing here, and this is something that Luther counsels us to do in our prayers. He's reminding God of God's promises and holding God to them. Now, do you think it's likely that God had forgotten his promises?
No.
No. So why do you think Jacob is reminding God, or what's the value? And why would Luther say this is what we should do in our prayers, is hold God to his promises? If God already remembers, since he never forgets, why are we repeating?
We need to remember.
So that we remember. And so that we know this is what God has promised to do. And then when it happens, we won't be congratulating ourselves on our excellent military tactics or anything like that. We will know this is what God promised to do. He has done as he has promised. But it also is an incredibly reassuring way to pray, to be able to say, God, you've promised X, Y, Z. And now we're trusting that that's exactly what you're going to do, and help us to know what our part is in that, or that sort of thing. So I actually really love this prayer on Jacob's part. There's a lot not to love about Jacob's decisions and words sometimes, but I love this prayer. Just reminding him exactly back the words that God had spoken and saying, could you fulfill those? Could you please honor those? I don't deserve it, but I need it. And that's a wonderful prayer, I think. Any thoughts? Let me pause there before we go through the rest of the plot points here. Okay, excellent. Just want to give you a chance. All right. So, oh boy, where did I pick up?
13.
Thank you. So he stayed there that night, and from what he had with him, he took a present for his brother Esau. Now this is enough to just be a present, so this gives you an idea how wealthy he is. 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milking camels and their calves. I have no idea what you use camel milk for, but I'm interested now. I assume it's the same thing you use any others, but at any rate, 30 milking camels and their calves, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. These he handed over to his servants, every drove by itself, and said to his servants, now listen to this. This dude's a negotiator through and through. Pass on ahead of me and put a space between drove and drove. So in theory, droves being the different flocks. So there's going to be, if you're tracking along here, there's going to be this huge group of goats. And then after a gap, probably not near enough to be able to see, then after a gap, they're going to be this huge group, drove of lambs, of sheep. Then after a gap, all the camels. Then after a gap, all the cows. Then after a gap, all the donkeys. Why? Why is he putting these gaps here?
Makes it seem bigger or.
Bigger and like, oh, look, this is nice. 200 goats. That's a nice present.
Right when you think it's done, there's more.
But wait, there's more. Ha! Here come 200 sheep. That's really nice. But wait, there's more. So I say this is a very shrewd individual, and he has been his whole life. So he puts the space. He instructed the first. When Esau, my brother, meets you and asks you, to whom do you belong? Where are you going? And whose are these ahead of you? Then you shall say, they belong to your servant Jacob. They are a present sent to my lord Esau. And moreover, he's behind us. And he likewise instructed the second and the third. And all who followed the droves, you shall say the same thing to Esau when you find him. And you shall say, moreover, your servant Jacob is behind us. What's the other value here? Yes, this is the whole idea of just continuing to make it seem like more and more. So we've got that as this wonderful negotiating tactic. What's the other, maybe more military or strategic tactic here?
If he kills off one, he'll know to run.
If he kills off one, he'll know to run. Or what's the advantage of saying, because notice that I think the words are chosen very carefully. Like, here's this flock and Jacob's behind us. Oh, look, there's another group coming. Does that group get attacked? If not, well, we're going to try it again. Oh, look, there's another group behind us. I think it's twofold. I think it's a way of essentially softening up Esau by making what could have been, if you see the whole lump sum at once, you know what it was. You get it bit by bit by bit. That's a negotiating tactic. But I think it's also a way of ensuring, are we safe here? What's going to happen? Does the first drove get attacked? If not, when he says, my master's behind me, does the second group get attacked? And so on and so forth with the third and the fourth. By the third or the fourth time, I got to think Esau's is like shaking his head like, dude. But at any rate, here we go. Oh, phooey. What verse? 20?
20?
Sorry, it's so repetitive.
It's the
too.
same thing.
Yeah, right?
It's the same.
All right, for he thought. All right, here we go. Yeah, this is 20. So, and you shall say, moreover, your servant Jacob is behind us. For he thought, I may appease him with the present that goes ahead of me. Afterward, I shall see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. Perhaps it will lift my face. Is literally. So you can have the idea of. I mean, I like the literal there. I'll be bowed down. Maybe he'll lift up my face, look on me in favor. By the way, we still have this in the blessing, depending on which translation we're using when we're doing setting 3. May the Lord lift his countenance upon you. I love that idea. May he look upon you with favor. May he lift his countenance upon you. So maybe this way. So verse 21. So the present passed on ahead of him. He himself stayed that night in the camp. Okay, one more thing we're gonna touch on here. This section we're gonna pick up next week with 33. How does the meeting actually go? But 22 through the end. The same night he arose, as still Jacob, and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. And he took them and sent them across the stream, and everything else that he had. And Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, let me go, for the day is broken. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And he said to him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. Then they just keep doing he and he and he, but this is the angel speaking. Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, which means to struggle with God or to strive with God or to wrestle with God. For you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. Then Jacob asked him, please tell me your name. But he said, why is it that you ask my name? And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, which you can see from the footnote means the face of God. For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered. The sun rose upon him as he passed Penuel, limping because of his hip. And therefore to this day the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip on the sinew of the thigh. All right, so first it's important, because this does show up in our lectionary. We get Jacob wrestling with God. I forget when it shows up, but it does. But understanding the setup makes a big difference, because how is Jacob feeling? He's just sent away all of these gifts, and now he's sent away. They're divided into 2 camps, but both camps he's sent across the river, and he's left alone. And what's he expect might happen the next day? This could be his last night on earth. Yep, if there are 400 armed men with his brother, if the gifts didn't work, that could be it. And he split up his camps and hoped that one of the 2 might survive, but he knows this could be his last night on earth. This could go really, really badly, because the last thing we saw from Esau, he was breathing out murderous threats. Remember, he said, my father will die soon, and once my father dies, I will kill my brother. And the word had reached their mother, and that's why Rebekah had sent Jacob away. So the last thing he heard is, Esau intends to kill me. He has every reason to believe Esau still intends to kill him. So, yeah, some big emotions maybe for Jacob as he's trying to go to bed. And then does he get to sleep? Nope. He ends up wrestling with someone he names himself as being God. Now, is this an angel? It never uses the word angel. It specifically says man. Who would the man that's God potentially be? Is it a pre-incarnate Christ? That's certainly one of the theories that's out there. And then the wrestling here. Let's work it backwards. How does the match end? Well, not quite.
Jacob.
Yeah. And what does the man do to make Jacob's hip go out of joint?
Touches.
Just touches it. Now, what have they been doing? If they've been wrestling, that's a lot of touching, right? Are we familiar with somebody who could be touching a lot of people, but then there could be a difference in the touch that all of a sudden becomes supernatural and miraculous? Remember Jesus with the crowd and the woman with the bleeding? And he says, somebody touched me, and the disciples are like, dude, everybody's touching you. What are you talking about? And Jesus says, no, I know this was different. I felt the power go out of me, which is just fascinating. I can't wait to talk to him about how does that work. But this miraculous touch, if they've been wrestling all night, as has been told, there's a lot of touching involved with wrestling. I'm not trying to make it sound weird. It's just, that's what it is, right? And yet now there's a difference to the touch when the man sees that just on a human level, he can't overpower him. And then he's just like, doink, there goes your hip, right? So it clearly, this is not just a human, but this is clearly a divine being that was willing to limit themselves to human means and bounds for a certain period of time. Is it actually Christ? We won't know till heaven. If we still care by then, it's one of the great questions we can ask. But I certainly see some strong parallels here. Christ, who emptied himself and became a human, but still could exercise miraculous power when the time was right to do so, wrestles with Jacob all night long. I really don't know how to picture how that started, because it just says Jacob was left alone and then a man wrestled with him. Like, is this how we do things in the Middle East at this time? Like, if there's just two dudes, you're like, want to wrestle? You know, I don't know what started this. I don't know how to envision this if we could watch the videotape of whatever happened. And yet we know this is Jacob wrestling with God, and God allowing him to see his face and yet still to live. But also notice, you don't wrestle with God and walk away untouched. God has some power and he's limping. You bet he is. Any of you had hip problems, you know what Jacob is dealing with right now. Interestingly also, doesn't say anything about it, but any attempt on Jacob's part to offer like physical resistance to whatever Esau is about to offer just went out the window, right? I mean, if your hip was just dislocated within a few hours beforehand, you're not going to be able to put up much of a fight. God has stripped him of all of his earthly belongings at this point, of all of his strength. I find it fascinating. Jacob left with nothing but his staff. He comes back with, at this point, nothing but his staff. And the promise of a God who has fulfilled his promise and made him into a great family and multiplied his possessions. It's not a lack of faith on Jacob's part to think this could be where my story stops. God has actually given me everything he promised he would give. He's checked all the boxes, so he could be done with me at this point. And instead, after wrestling with him, he gets this blessing that Jacob insists on, which is interesting because the last thing that happened before he left this land was Jacob stealing a blessing, and now Jacob being given a blessing willingly by the God who he now knows could have totally overpowered him if he had wanted to. And God kind of putting a bow on this. You've been wrestling against me. You've been wrestling against man. Let's stop this. Instead, how about you rely on my blessing and on my promise instead? So, any thoughts with this bit? John? His name is now changed from Jacob to Israel. Israel, which means struggles with God. Now, he's going to be referred to by both names throughout the rest of Scripture. But it is always worth knowing that the nation name of Israel is a person name of Israel. So the 12 tribes of Israel, we tend to think of that in terms of a nationality, but literally it means the 12 sons. At this point, there's only 11. There's going to be a 12th born after their study is complete. The 12 tribes of Israel means the 12 sons of Jacob. I do think, though I can't prove it, that sometimes in the New Testament when they'll make references, I do think sometimes they're intentional about when they use the name Jacob and when they use the name Israel. I think sometimes the name of Jacob can be a reminder of where he started from, and the name of Israel can be a reminder of the promise that God gave him, who he transformed him to be. Like I said, I can't really prove it. You can use both names interchangeably, and sometimes I think that's all that's happening, particularly in poetry, where they like to use multiple different names still to this day. So if it's in the Psalms, you may not lean on it a whole lot, but if it's in some of the other places that talk about Jacob or that talk about Israel, particularly in the New Testament, pay attention to which name is being used. Might there be some significance to that? Talking about the Jacob who was the trickster and the grasping by the heel, versus, I mean, his name is now the one who wrestles with God, but the one who has now fully embodied the promise that God has given him. Just worth keeping in mind. Christy.
I love it. It's just so rich. I love the concept of the name and that sort of thing. Just like this is the same story God continues to tell each of us individually. Like this is we all have to be okay, at least or so myself, wrestle with God to the point where I can't wrestle anymore. You just have to give up and he just he breaks you essentially so that he can give you his new name and then you can live in the promise that he's given you. It's so beautiful that he does it here so physically and tangibly for Jacob, but that's the same thing that he continues to do with all of us.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love it. The parallel for our own lives. We wrestle with God. That's not a fight we can win. He has to break us of our will sometimes. But I do also love with it, I think this just dovetails with your point, the restraint. God could just wipe us out. Clearly shown by the one touch to dislocate the hip. At any point, the angel could have just completely overpowered and destroyed Jacob. That wasn't the intent. It's not God's intention to destroy us. It is God's intention to redirect us. And so, yeah, I love that this is included too. And the fact, by the way, God doesn't even seem offended by the fact that Jacob is wrestling with him, which is kind of cool too. So, other thoughts? All right, fantastic. Yeah, Carol, go ahead.
Just one quick thought.
Hmm?
And all of this, underlying all of this, is that God is fulfilling his song.
Yeah. Yep, this is all still, yep, overarching still is God's plan. He made it to Abraham, renewed it with Isaac, renewed it with Jacob, and is still continuing to carry it on. And part of the reason that we're not going to end with Jacob's death is because Jacob's death doesn't come till all the way down in Egypt after all of those events with Joseph, and Joseph's going to be essentially he's going to run Egypt. He's not the Pharaoh, but he's in charge of everything. And then Israel and all of his sons are going to be invited down, and they're going to thrive in the land of Goshen, and that's where Jacob is finally going to die. And
the works will survive all the way down the line.
Yep. Yep. And actually, very, very cool is his bones will be carried back to be buried in the same tomb where his grandfather and grandmother and his father and mother have been buried, which is very cool, very tangible, very physical, back in the land that was promised. So some cool stuff to see later on too. Any other thoughts? I'm glad we had a chance. These don't lend themselves easily to very quick attention, and that's why I kind of skipped over the whole interchange and all of the strategy and everything. But you can see what the relationship was between Jacob and Laban, the way that God was able to reconcile that, but also set up a healthy boundary. And then the struggling, the way he's trying to win over Esau. We're going to see if that's going to work next time. So next time will be the last time because the calendar demands that it must be. We're going to read 33. We're going to read 35, at least the first half of it. 34 with Dinah, the only one. Remember we talked before about all these boys and one girl, and yeah, it's involved. You can definitely go ahead and read it. It's not pleasant. It's not portraying people as heroes, and so you're going to see some of what goes on continues to go on amongst all of Jacob's children. But we're primarily going to look at 33 and 35. I might give a quick summary of 34, but you certainly can read it and consider what it might teach us. So, all right, let's close with a word of prayer. The Lord be with you. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you have recorded your word for us. And as St. Paul teaches, everything that was written in the past was written to teach us so that we might be strengthened and renewed in our faith. And so studying the patriarchs, coming near to the end of the tale of now Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, now called Israel, we see they are flawed. They frequently are dishonest. They frequently are sinful. They frequently don't trust you to deliver what you've promised, and yet you remain faithful. And so we thank you for that. As evidenced in their lives, they are not perfect, but you can use the imperfect people. We pray that you would do that with us. Where we're wrestling with you, we thank you for your restraint in not destroying us. but we pray that you would redirect us to your plans. And we pray for the reconciliation that only you can bring to be something we get to experience in our own lives as well. If not here on earth, we look forward to it in heaven. Thank you for each person here. We trust that by your word, by your spirit, which you poured out at Pentecost, you would go with us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thanks so much, everybody.